Cloud at least slower to clear, but widespread sunshine actually on Friday morning. Cloudier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still windy here with further showers in the far north. But even those showers ease away on Saturday as high pressure builds from the south. We're going to see sunny spells for most, and it's going to feel warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
An analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and my word, we've got quite a week, or quite a programme I should say, coming up today. It is finally been the publication of the Sue Gray report. After months of expectations, we finally have it. She has said that many of the events inside Downing Street and Whitehall should not have been allowed to happen, and that staff who raised concerns were not treated with respect. The Prime Minister, under pressure from opposition MPs, and indeed from some of his own, has said he is humbled by what happened and he's very apologetic, that he wants to apologise. But in the end, is the political moment of danger over for the Prime Minister? We'll be discussing that with MPs from across the Commons throughout the next hour. But also we'll be hearing from Boris Johnson himself. The Prime Minister's due to hold a press conference live from Downing Street in the next 30 minutes. We'll bring you that on GB News. But first, live from Westminster. Before we do all of that, let's go to the studio for the latest news headlines. And here's Rosie Wright.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister says he takes full responsibility for everything that took place on his watch following the publication of Sue Gray's report into lockdown parties at Downing Street. The 37-page document, which contains photographs, highlights a number of events where many people gathered and alcohol was consumed excessively. It concludes the gatherings were not in line with COVID guidance at the time and that the senior leadership must bear responsibility for this culture. Boris Johnson denies deliberately misleading Parliament and maintains he did not personally witness any rules being broken.
It's clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules and they fell foul of the rules. I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, told the Commons that the Sue Gray report laid bare the rot in Number 10. He called on MPs to tell Boris Johnson it's time to pack his bags.
It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful.
Well, the Chancellor is expected to unveil a multi-billion-pound plan to help struggling families through the cost of living crisis. A new windfall tax on energy firms could be used to fund the package after the energy regulator Ofgem warned the energy price cap could rise by a further £830 on average in October. A woman in Cumbria has been jailed for the murder of a one-year-old boy that she was hoping to adopt. Laura Castle reported that Leyland James Corkill was hurt after falling off a sofa, but hospital medics raised concerns about her claims. He died the following day from catastrophic head injuries. The 38-year-old will serve a minimum term of 18 years. A retired doctor who sexually assaulted his patients for over 3 decades has been jailed for 12 years. Krishna Singh was convicted of abusing 47 women from 1984 to 2018. The 72-year-old's victims include pregnant women, a rape survivor, and 4 girls under the age of 16. He's also been placed on the sex offenders register. The Foreign Secretary says the government wants to remove the customs bureaucracy from the Northern Ireland Protocol rather than scrap it completely. Speaking today in Belfast, Liz Truss said the UK is open to talking with the European Union, but warned the issue can't be delayed any longer. She added that the UK has practical solutions to ease frictions to protect the single market and the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, I think everybody in Northern Ireland recognises there are issues with the protocol that needs to be addressed. We're not talking about scrapping the protocol. What we're talking about is fixing the issues so that we can protect north-south trade whilst at the same time making east-west trade easier. And my preference, as I've said, is to get a negotiated solution with the EU, but we simply can't allow this situation to drift.
In the US, at least 19 children and 2 teachers have been killed by a teenage gunman after he barricaded himself in a 4th-grade classroom in Texas. A Texas public safety official says they've not yet confirmed how many have been injured, but multiple children did survive. The 18-year-old suspect, named as Salvador Ramos, opened fire at a primary school in Uvalde and was shot dead by an officer at the scene. His motive is not known. President Biden says Congress must pass new gun laws. Travellers can expect major travel disruption after the RMT union voted in favour of what it's calling the biggest rail strike in modern history. The RMTs told GBNews the action won't take place over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. The union's senior assistant general secretary, Eddie Dempsey, says rail firms have made millions during the pandemic and his members need a pay rise.
Our members, some of them are now in the 3rd year of a pay freeze. Inflation, RPI is at 11.1% now, and this is the biggest cost of living crisis people are saying since records began, and they're feeling the pinch. They regard themselves as having worked extremely hard during the pandemic in difficult circumstances to keep the country moving, and they feel now that they're being betrayed.
You're up to date now on GB News, and we'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. Coming up to 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon, we're live outside the Houses of Parliament, perhaps unsurprisingly today, given that we finally got to see that Sue Gray report, a report much talked about over the last 5 months or so. And it's pretty damaging, pretty damning of the culture inside Downing Street and Whitehall, in which there were multiple parties breaking the COVID rules at the time. Events that saw people partying and revelling until 4:30 a.m. in the morning, excessive drinking, red wine spilt on Downing Street carpets, altercations between members of staff, essentially mini fights, a lack of respect to the cleaners and the security staff who repeatedly told revellers, civil servants, members of Downing Street staff to stop breaking the rules. They will now be issued an apology. And Martin Reynolds, the Prime Minister's former principal private secretary, who clearly knew what they were doing was wrong. He wrote in a WhatsApp message that at one stage they'd seemed to have gotten away with it. Sue Gray in the end concluded that the event should never have been allowed to happen and that senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, must bear responsibility for that culture. But in the end, the Prime Minister argues that he thought that the rules were being followed, that these were work events that he attended, and that the worst excesses that I've just talked about happened either when he had left or when he wasn't in Downing Street at all. It looks likely that he will live to survive another political day. The sense here at Westminster is that this report, while damning, is not enough to prompt a leadership challenge. Let's bring in the thoughts of one Conservative MP, that is Michael Fabricant, the Conservative MP for Lichfield, who joins me outside Parliament. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, what are your first impressions of Sue Gray's report?
Well, we'd all been anticipating this for quite a long time, actually, and when I got to see it, and particularly the conclusions, I didn't think it was as damning as I expected it to be. If I could show one photo, I don't know whether you can zoom up on it. And what it is it's the Prime Minister looking at a presentation that's about to be made on policy. And I think he's got orange juice and food around. I mean, would you call that a gathering? I suppose it was a gathering, but no way is it a party. Look, there's no question that the Prime Minister is damaged by this. There are a lot of angry people out there, particularly in my own constituency. People who couldn't attend weddings, more worryingly, people who couldn't attend funerals. My very best friend, his mother died in hospital during COVID, from COVID, and he couldn't visit her when she was...
Are you angry, though, when you hear of people breaking swings, partying till 4:30 a.m., spilling red wine, abusing the cleaners?
Hugely angry, hugely angry. I mean, there's sort of arrogance there, but... You were right in your introduction to say the Prime Minister wasn't there. I mean, it's a very, very big building. I mean, people think it's a sort of semi-detached little house. It's not. In fact, the Prime Minister said today it's over 5,300 square metres. Several hundred people work there. The Friday night parties that we heard about, which was news to me, were when Boris Johnson was some 50 miles away at Chequers. So
he did turn up at some of these events. Clearly, Sue Gray talked about how his presence and the presence of all the senior members of staff give the impression to junior members of staff that this was all acceptable. Boris Johnson didn't walk into those rooms and say, get out of here, you're breaking the rules, this is not allowed, you should be working or you should go home. In fact, he joined in and had a drink.
Yes, I mean, the example given was the works party or the works drinks for a going away party for Lee Kane, the previous press secretary. But Boris Johnson had been given advice by very senior civil servants that actually it was part of the day's job. Anyone who's worked in business in a senior role will know that one attends going away parties and that sort of thing. So I think that very loud motorbike over there, we're not being heckled by a flatulent socialist. But Boris Johnson himself had been advised that, and, I think that's the key thing.
Which might give the impression that he wasn't...
The Prime Minister never drafts laws. At the end of the day, and I think it's worth casting your mind back, to begin with, people like Michael Gove were saying, in my opinion, quite rightly, look, we don't need to have rules. We've just got to use our common sense. Don't mix with outsiders because you can spread the disease.
Well,
and then the press said...
The government messaging at that time was not even just to break them, don't bend the rules. They were suggesting people's lives were at risk if they did.
But it wasn't in this instance because these were all people who had been working closely together anyway. So it was a perfectly reasonable understanding that they were exempt.
I'm not entirely sure the person of wallpapering the Downing Street flat who went to that birthday party was working closely. Let's in the end, though, look at what Sue Gray said, that the officials and political leadership in Downing Street need to bear responsibility. Now, Allegra Stratton's resigned. Martin Reynolds has gone. The former Director of Communications has gone. Civil servants have borne the responsibility. Can you name anyone politically who's borne responsibility?
I don't think that is the question, if you don't mind my saying, Darren. You've posed the question, but I think really that's not the question. I think the question is, how could this ever have happened in the first place, and what could be done in the future to ever stop it happening again, if, God forbid, we have another pandemic, and God forbid we made the mistake, actually, of listening to what newspapers said and saying we want clear directions, because this is where all the problems came from. People drafting, because earlier you were saying, you know, Boris didn't understand his own rules, but they weren't his rules in the sense that he was saying, you know, you mustn't mix, you mustn't go outside to parties. And, you know, this didn't happen. Boris didn't do this. It was all in the workplace environment. So, you know, we've got to move on. And I know politicians always say that, but a lot of people out there, and I think GBNews listeners in particular, may well say, you know, come on, there's a war in Ukraine and all the rest of it. And the point is that Boris has put in place a new structure at number 10 Downing Street to stop this from ever happening again.
Why do you think so many of your colleagues weren't on the benches today to listen to the Prime Minister? It's not like exactly a show of support if you leave halfway through, is it?
Well, I think people were getting bored with it, to be frank. They were there at the very beginning.
Is it not because they're a bit embarrassed by it all?
No, I know your implication, that it's a good question. But I don't think it's that. I think look, the thing about Boris is that he's a Marmite character, and that's a good example. I personally am a great Marmite fan, and I'm a great Boris fan, and I still support him totally, because having been in business, having known what it's like to run a large organisation, and don't forget, he doesn't run it, it's the senior civil servants who run it, I can understand how this whole thing arises. It's all empathy. Just as I can also understand the huge anger of people in Lichfield and Burntwood and elsewhere who feel, you know, we stuck to the rules and Boris didn't, even though he thought he was sticking to the rules at the time.
Just very finally, what do you make of Tobias Ellwood's question? Could you name another Prime Minister who would have allowed the shenanigans inside number 10 to carry on like Boris Johnson did?
Well, I'm not.
We know Theresa May would never have allowed it.
No, Theresa May wouldn't, but I could name Prime Ministers, but I won't. I mean, I can tell you that when they stopped selling beer and wine, which of course we have in the House of Commons, and some would say we should stop that. And that was back in the 90s, a long time ago. You know, the business about bringing wine in on a suitcase started under Blair's administration, happened under Brown, and for all Theresa May knew, it might have happened under her, but she certainly wouldn't have condoned it and didn't know about it.
Indeed. OK, Michael Fabricant, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us here outside Parliament. I'm going to shove you over that way, if that's all right.
Shoving away.
Good. Thank you, Michael. OK, well, let's have a look back at some of the exchanges we did have in Parliament today. Keir Starmer, of course, got a chance to respond to what the Prime Minister had to say. Let's have a listen in to a bit of the to and fro in the Commons chamber.
With permission, I will make a statement. I'm grateful to Sue Gray for her report today, and I want to thank her for the work that she's done. I also thank the Metropolitan Police for completing their investigation, and I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the Cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Sue Gray's report has emphasised that it is up to the political leadership in number 10 to take ultimate responsibility, and of course I do. But since these investigations have now come to an end, this is my first opportunity to set out some of the context and to explain both my understanding of what happened and also to explain what I have previously said to this House. And it's important to set out that over a period of about 600 days, gatherings on a total of 8 dates have been found to be in breach of the regulations in a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats. Mr. Speaker, I do think it is important because this is the first time a chance I've had to set out the context. Hundreds of staff are entitled to work. and in the Cabinet Office, which has thousands of officials and now is the biggest it's been in any point in its 100-year history. And that is in itself one of the reasons why the government is now looking for change and reform. The exemption under which they were present in Downing Street includes those circumstances where officials and advisers were leaving the government. And it was appropriate to recognise them, to thank them for the work that they have done. Let me come to that, Mr. Speaker. I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership, and particularly important when people need to feel that their contributions have been appreciated, and to keep morale as high as possible. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I said, and I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance have been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The door of number 10 Downing Street is one of the great symbols of our democracy. Those who live behind it exercise great power, but they do so knowing their stay is temporary. Long after they've gone, that door and the democracy it represents will remain firm and unyielding. But Britain's constitution is fragile. It relies on members of this House and the custodians of number 10 behaving responsibly, honestly, and in the interests of the British people. When our leaders fall short of these standards, this House has to act. For months, members opposite have asked the country to wait. First, for the police investigation, which concluded that this Prime Minister is the first in our country's history to have broken the law in office. Then they asked the country to wait for the Sue Gray report. They need wait no longer. That report lays bare the rot that under this Prime Minister has spread in number 10, and it provides definitive proof of how those within the building treated the sacrifices of the British people with utter contempt. When the dust settles and the anger subsides, this report will stand as a monument to the hubris and the arrogance of a government that believed it was one rule for them and another rule for everyone else.
Well, that was the to and fro there between the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer a little bit earlier in the Commons. Don't forget, we are expecting to hear again from the Prime Minister in just over 10 minutes time. He's going to be talking and taking questions from journalists at 3:30 from Downing Street. We'll bring you that live. And by the way, do get in touch. I know lots of you feel very passionate about this, one way or another. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at GBNews. Let's bring in the Liberal Democrat MP, Christine Jardine, who joins us outside the Commons as well this afternoon. Christine, thank you, as always, for joining us. If you shift a little bit that way, what did you make of Sue Gray's report?
Sue Gray's report is quite damning. It is, the language she uses is not overinflated, but she is quite clear and quite blunt that the parties that happened were unacceptable and they didn't meet the standard of behaviour that should be expected from the leadership. She talks about a failure of leadership and the fact that there were members of staff, security staff and some of the cleaning staff who said actually you shouldn't be having these parties, and they were ignored. So, and there's also a very worrying part of the report which talks about the way that they were spoken to and they were treated. So whichever way you look at it, it does not look good for the Prime Minister because he is responsible for the tone within Downing Street. He's responsible for the leadership. And it was lacking.
In saying that, I mean, he has apologised. I think those members of staff are going to get an individual apology. And in the end, nothing dramatic has happened today in the sense that we know he got fined before and he's taken responsibility for what happened in Downing Street. In the end, his argument is he thought these were work events. The police clearly thought that his presence there meant he thought they were work events.
No, it's not acceptable. It's not enough. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be dramatic for you to be wrong. He's completely wrong here. He has shown no respect for what the rest of the public were going through at a time, and Sue Gray mentions this in her report, at a time when they were making unprecedented sacrifices. They were living in very difficult conditions, in lockdown, not able to speak to loved ones, visit, people dying in hospital. They were having parties in Downing Street. Now, whichever way you look at it, to the ordinary families up and down this country and pensioners who are struggling, have been for years, first with the pandemic, now with an economic crisis, they look at Boris Johnson and they see a man who's got no empathy for what they've been through.
Well, I mean, he would say that actually he was just saying goodbye to members of staff. His presence there was pretty brief. And in the end, all the awful stuff we've read about, he wasn't there. He wasn't even sometimes even in Downing Street itself.
He has to accept the judgment of the British public. We all do. And I think at the local elections the other week, we saw that the British public are not happy with what they're getting. I was getting on doorsteps that people, lifelong Conservative voters, are not happy with Boris Johnson. Now, the Conservative Party, for their own sake and for the country's sake, need to listen to that. They need to see that this is a man that the country doesn't particularly want as Prime Minister, and that it's time that we all moved on, as they said today. But the only way we're going to be able to move on, the only way we're going to be able to deal effectively with the cost of living crisis is if we have a Prime Minister who can actually lead. And that's not Boris Johnson.
In the end, though, you write and say it's going to be up to members of the public. Isn't that where we should leave it now? We draw a line under this and they will ultimately make the decision about whether they believe the Prime Minister or not.
Well,
because he's not going to resign, so that's the only outcome of this, isn't it?
No, it's now up to the Conservative MPs. If he's not going to resign, then Conservative MPs have to look at what's best for the country. And it's no good saying, well, we've got a Prime Minister nobody's got any faith in, but there's a general election in 2 years' time or a general election in 18 months. We need someone who's in charge now. We have an economic crisis now. There's a war in Ukraine now, and we need to know that the government's attention is focused on that. And what are they going to do? When they have a difficult week in Ukraine, have a party in Downing Street?
The whole point is that the government would be concentrating on that if the opposition didn't keep bringing up these parties.
No, there's an issue of credibility. And you cannot ask people to put faith in you and lead the country if you've no credibility. Boris Johnson's credibility is shot.
OK. Christine Georgine, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us outside Parliament. I'm going to do what I did with Michael and shoo you over that. It's like Strictly Come Dancing. A very bad version. A very bad version of. Thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who is in the studio in London for us. Mark, lots of questions over the last couple of days, haven't there, about the Met's investigation of all of this, about why, for example, Boris Johnson got fined and Rishi Sunak in that cabinet room, but you can clearly see Sir Simon Case there, the head of the civil service, who was at that exact same party and didn't get fined. So lots of people questioning or wanting to see the methodology, the rationale for the police's actions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty with all this is that, people called for the Metropolitan Police to carry out an investigation in the first place. This is something that Scotland Yard, as a policy, didn't do retrospectively in terms of COVID breaches. They were bounced into that by all of the public outcry and the political outcry in particular. And that bounced the Met Commissioner then, before she resigned, of course, Cressida Dick, into opening up this investigation. Now, we've had many months of this investigation involving a team of 12 dedicated officers who've looked at every aspect of what has gone on at the various functions that took place in and around Downing Street and Whitehall. And all of the pictures, of course, that we're seeing today and that people are getting very excited about, Scotland Yard detectives have seen for some considerable time now. And not just that, they've spoken to everyone attending these events. They've taken statements, sometimes multiple statements, cross-checked those, investigated thoroughly what has gone on. They have come up with a set of conclusions and fined 126 fines were issued, fined 83 people. Some of those, of course, have received multiple fines. But at the end of the day, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and his wife received one fine each. And people are not happy with the outcome. Well, this is the process that they wanted, the investigation by Scotland Yard, because they are not happy with the conclusions that Scotland Yard has drawn up. Now they want that relitigated or reinvestigated. It's not going to happen. Scotland Yard are more than happy now to wash their hands of the whole thing, having been reluctantly dragged in to this political issue in the first place. They didn't want to go there. They've done their bit. They are not going to reopen this investigation as far as they're concerned.
And we know, Mark, don't we, that of course Durham police are currently investigating Keir Starmer, and it's a reminder that even though the rules were the same across the country, well, certainly in England, different in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, different police forces had at their discretion how to implement them, or how to judge those rules.
Yes, I mean, Durham Constabulary is a completely different force from the Metropolitan Police, independent of anything that the Metropolitan Police does. So that investigation will be conducted on the evidence before those detectives, those officers within Durham Constabulary, before a decision is then made on whether that particular event that was attended by Keir Starmer and others was in breach of COVID guidelines. If it was in breach of COVID laws, then the next decision will be who, if anyone, in attendance at that event was in breach of COVID laws and requires to be sent a fixed penalty notice. That will be clearly very difficult for Sir Keir Starmer, who has said that if that were the case, then he would, of course, resign. Now, of course, all of those who are calling for the Metropolitan Police now to re-examine the conclusions that they've come to, and clearly from their point of view, to be much more strict in their interpretation of these COVID laws, well, they better be careful what they wish for, because if that is the process Indeed. That they're embarking on, well, the same could be said for any conclusions from Durham Constabulary if it doesn't come down on a breach or a fine for Sir Keir Starmer. There may be many others on the other side of the political divide calling on Durham Constabulary to do exactly what these people are calling on the Metropolitan Police to do. It's a big old mess. People are fed up of it. I completely understand why.
OK, Mark White, as always, thank you very much indeed, Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, joining us from the studio. Don't forget, we are expected to hear from the Prime Minister any minute now. That's in the briefing room in Downing Street. We'll, of course, bring you that live. He's going to answer questions from journalists, as I say, in the next couple of minutes. As we await that, let's bring in Claire Purcell, former Conservative advisor, Conservative councillor, who joins us outside Parliament. Claire, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What's your impression of today, and what's gone on with the Sue Gray report, and indeed the reaction inside Parliament?
I think the problem with it has been billed as the report everybody must read, and it seems to have fallen a little bit flat.
Claire, as always, you just started, but so is the Prime Minister. Let's go over to Downing Street now and listen in to what Boris Johnson has to say.
Identified a number of failings, some official, some political, and some that I accept are entirely my own, for which I take full responsibility. I want to start by saying that I'm humbled by what has happened, and I renew my wholehearted apology for the gathering in the Cabinet room on the 19th of June 2020, my birthday, for which I received a fixed penalty notice. Now that Sue Gray has completed her inquiry and everyone can read her report, I want, in all humility and without mitigating what has happened, to offer a few points of context. 10 Downing Street is not just my official residence, but the headquarters of the government, where hundreds of people work, and because they directly support the Prime Minister, the regulations allowed them to continue attending their offices for work purposes throughout the lockdowns. Sue Gray describes them as tight-knit groups of officials and advisors who worked long hours under difficult conditions. These were the public servants who secured the PPE that saved many lives, established the biggest testing programme in Europe, and enabled the development and distribution of the vaccines that succeeded in protecting so many people. When some of these officials and advisors were leaving their jobs, I briefly attended gatherings to thank them for everything they had done, because I believe that recognising achievement and preserving morale are essential duties of leadership. The police did not find my attendance at these occasions to be a breach of the rules, but they found otherwise in respect of some of those gatherings after I had left or when I was not in the building. Downing Street and the Cabinet Office together have hundreds of rooms, and again, I say this not in any way to extenuate my personal responsibility, but to give context to these events. And I was in particular appalled to learn that there have been multiple examples, in Sue Gray's phrase, of disrespectful and poor treatment of cleaning and security personnel. And this afternoon I personally apologised to those dedicated members of staff for what happened, and I expect anyone who behaved in that way to do the same. As Sue Gray acknowledges, I have acted on her recommendations to make a series of changes. 10 Downing Street now has its own permanent secretary charged with upholding the highest standards. I've appointed a new leadership team, including a new chief of staff and a new principal private secretary. And I've made it easier for any member of staff to voice any worries they may have. And Sue Gray says that she is reassured by this reform. And it is precisely because I have learned this lesson that I feel an even greater weight of responsibility to deliver on the priorities of the British people and lead our country through some of the most challenging times in recent history. I will work every hour to ease the hardship caused by the rising cost of living, to protect our nation from the aftershocks of COVID, to stand firm against Putin's aggression and unite and level up across our United Kingdom. That is the mission that drives this government, and that is the mission I will continue to pursue. Thank you all very much for coming. We're going to try and get as many questions in as possible. Can I just say one thing? We'll have a chance to have more questions if everybody can bear to confine herself to one question each. Let's go first to Chris Mason of the BBC.
Thank you. Chris Mason from Freeview. Prime Minister, address our viewer today who hears all of this and questions your character, your judgment, your integrity and your willingness to tell the unvarnished truth. Bluntly, talk to our viewer, convince our viewer that you're not tempted or willing to lie to get out of a tight spot.
No, I thank you very much, Chris, and I hope that the imaginary viewer, I hope it's not an imaginary viewer, I hope we've got several viewers right now. I just say to that person, look, I've tried to explain as clearly as I can what happened, why I said what I said to the House of Commons, the event for which I have been found to be at fault. I've tried to explain the event in the Cabinet room, and on July 19, 2020. Where I was basically standing at my desk for a brief period, surrounded by some other colleagues, and then I've tried to explain the context of why I was at other events where I was saying farewell to valued colleagues, and I know that people will think some people will think it was wrong even to do that. I have to say I respectfully disagree. I think it was right. When people are working very hard for very long hours, when they're giving up a huge amount to serve their country, and they're moving on to some other part of government, I think it is right to thank them, or leaving government service altogether. I think it is right to thank them. And I repeat what I said in the Commons earlier on. I believe that they were work events. They were part of my job, and that view appears to be substantiated by the fact that I wasn't fined for those events. For the rest, I just want to say, I appreciate that things didn't go in the way that I would have wanted. The events proceeded afterwards in the way that I certainly wouldn't have wanted to see. What happened with the custodians was plainly, and the cleaners was plainly, utterly unacceptable. And I apologise for that, as I've apologised to them personally. Harry Cole, The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. On that point, sick was left in corridors, wiring up the walls, left for cleaners to clean up. Staff who work for you were rude to security members of this building. What steps are you taking beyond asking them to say sorry? And is there a place in your administration for that sort of behaviour? And if I may, you were rather coy in the House of Commons earlier when asked directly by one of your MPs if you ever asked Sue Gray not to publish her report subsequent to the police investigation. Do you want to clear that up now? Did you infer at any point to Sue Gray that publication might not be necessary?
No. So look, on that, it's impossible for the terms of reference make it absolutely clear that Sue has got to publish a report, and I think it's entirely right that she has, and I think that the what she's published is, you couldn't. I don't think anybody could reasonably say, look, reading that report, that an awful lot has been swept under the carpet. To be absolutely frank with you, but I would just say on the behaviour of staff and the alleged rudeness. It is. I don't know who is specifically is guilty of that. So in the course of my apologies today, I began to make some inquiries, and I will of course continue them. And as I said earlier on, if people have been, I think it's utterly intolerable for people to be rude to hard-working staff, and at the very least that they should apologise. But I don't yet have the names of those who are responsible. Matt Fry, Channel 4.
Prime Minister, we are sitting, or standing in your case, in the place that flouted the rules that were made here more than any other institution in the country. You yourself have made history by becoming the first Prime Minister to break the law while in office. Now, you talk about other people who've insulted staff and so on, but I want to know what you think your own personal failings were in creating the culture that allowed this to happen.
I think, Matt, the best thing I can invite you to do is look very carefully at what Sue has said, and if you read her report and you look at the detail in which she describes, you talk about me, my own participation in the events, what I did, how long I was there, and so on. I think you get a pretty fair picture of what took place. That does not mean that I don't accept responsibility for the totality of what happened. And yes, I bitterly regret it. And that's why we've taken steps since the interim report, in particular, to drive a lot of change in Number 10 and the way Number 10 works, and to ensure that there are much clearer lines of command, and everybody understands, the difference between being engaged in work and in socialising. And I think that is the crucial thing. Jason Groves, Daily Mail.
Thanks. Your principal private secretary appears to have been organising parties against advice. He seems to have been boasting about it, about getting away with it. Why didn't you stop him? And more broadly, is anyone in Whitehall government going to face any sort of disciplinary process as a result of this sorry saga? Yes.
So first of all, Jason, I don't want to comment on individuals who are named in the report. I don't think it's right for politicians to talk about officials in that way, any official. What I can say is that I think that we've all no. So I want to be clear. I didn't know that. For instance, a lot of the stuff that I saw in the report this morning, was news to me. But I think it's important. Let me put it this way. I think it's important that everybody who's named, and everybody who hasn't been named, everybody who's in any way involved in this whole business has got to learn the lessons, and that applies to everybody in the report. Tom Harwood, GB News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The fines that were issued across Downing Street and the whole of Whitehall were for events that took place over varying levels of restriction. It took months of investigation to determine whether a number of edge cases broke the rules that you set or not. Indeed, you said earlier in Parliament that it can be very difficult to decide the boundary between what qualifies as work and what qualifies as socialising. So in hindsight, were the rules that you set simply too unclear, too illogical and too tight for too long? And just if I may, on another issue that really does affect people up and down the country, real wages are projected to be lower in 2026 than they were in 2008. What are you going to do about it?
So first of all, Tom, on the rules, we had to implement, and this is a controversial thing, and there are many people who think that you could have done without restrictions. You could have just relied on people's personal responsibility. The difficulty was that we were facing a pandemic of a kind that we'd never seen before, certainly not in my lifetime. Its effects were unknowable, and all the medical and scientific advice was that you had to proceed by non-pharmaceutical interventions. You had to get people to behave according to certain rules. So I don't think the flaw was with the rules, Tom. I've got to, we should have recognised that the boundary between work events and socialising for people who are continuously working together in the same place was going to be hard to draw, and things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently from now on. On your point about incomes, which is the crucial thing, and look, the COVID pandemic cost the government a huge. It cost taxpayers $408 billion just to support businesses and support families through the. It's left a very difficult fiscal position. Employment is very strong. Some features of our economy are extremely strong, but there's no doubt because of the global supply chain shocks exacerbated by what Putin has done in Ukraine. By the spike in the price of energy, we're going to see pressures for a while to come. I've just got to be realistic with people about that. We're going to see pressures on household finances. So what I'm saying to people is that we will continue to respond, just as we responded throughout the pandemic. It won't be easy. We won't be able to fix everything. But what I will also say is that we will get through it, and we will get through it well. And that we have some fortunate fundamentals, not least the lowest unemployment rate since 1974. That we have a strong labour market. We have a lot of firms who are looking to hire people, looking to grow, and that augurs well for the future. But there's no question we have pressure now on household finances. Everybody knows it, everybody can feel it, and believe me, the government is going to do everything we can to help people. Let's go to Esther Webber, Politico.
No, that's it. Given everything we've heard and what you said about the boundaries not being properly drawn, what can you say to reassure us that you and the officials you appoint to the top jobs are capable of being the grown-up in the room?
Thank you, Esther. I think that just on me in particular and my role, I just remind you of what I have said, and I hope I won't seem to be pernickety when I say that I thought the things that I was attending were work events. I thought that my job was to thank people for their contribution to public life, to government service. But plainly, we all made mistakes, and we have to learn from them. It is no mitigation, but it's helped set the context that these were really, really exceptional circumstances, but then they were exceptional for everybody in the country, and I accept that. Beth Rigby, Sky.
Thank you. Prime Minister, vomit, drunken altercations, security staff being treated with contempt, cleaners having to mop up red wine. Sue Gray's a shaming dossier, really, isn't it? of what's meant to be the place, the heart of government that sets the standards of our country. And it's your culture under your leadership. Did you never for a moment during the past 5 months, or even this morning when that report landed on your desk and you read it blow by blow, think about resigning? A poll out today, just out, says 3 in 5 Britons think you should.
Yes, Beth, of course I understand why people are indignant and why people have been angry at what took place. All I can say is that I really think that given everything that is going on right now, it's my job to get on and serve the people of this country, not just to get us through the biggest war in Europe for 70 years, but a huge spike in the cost of living, and to deliver our manifesto commitments on which I was elected with a large majority. I hear you, I understand you, but I really feel it's my job to get on.
Was there any point you thought about it though? Because during any of it, did you ever think this?
Why are only you allowed to come back, Beth? It shows you have some special position. Okay, forgive me. Forgot it. Well, look, I mean, I just repeat my my point. I think that I overwhelmingly feel it is my job to get on and deliver. And no matter how bitter and painful the conclusions of this may be, and they are, and no matter how humbling they are, I've got to keep moving forward, and the government's got to keep moving, and we are. And just this week we're getting on with things that, again, delivering on things that have been left undone for a very long time, trying to fix the legacy issues in Northern Ireland. Incredibly difficult thing to do. Government for decades have shirked it. But we're getting on and doing it, and I was pleased to see that at least Peter Mandelson is supporting what we're doing, even if the current opposition is not. We will get on and continue to do the tough things. Jess Elgott, The Guardian.
Prime Minister, people in this room told us that there were no parties. People from your press office told us there were no parties. And we now know that parties took place in the press office. Were those people told to lie to us? Yeah. And do you concede now that they did lie?
Well, Jess, I don't know exactly what they told you, but my having talked to people in this building about what happened and what was said, it's my strong impression that they genuinely believed that what they were doing was working, and they were working around the clock, and they did not think that what they were doing was in conflict with the rules. That's what they told me, and so look, I certainly don't think that they set out to deceive you about that. But plainly, if you look at what Sue has found, and if you look at what the Met have found, that simply wasn't right. And we've got to accept it. And we've got to recognise that mistakes were made. And we've got to I've made a lot of changes already, and we'll continue to make changes. But I think the best thing I can do is continue to repeat the apologies that I've given, but also to stress that I think we just have to try, if we possibly can, to continue with the people's priorities, and we certainly can, and we will. And on that point, Paul Brand, ITV.
Prime Minister, you said so far this afternoon that some of this rule breaking was news to you. You told MPs, you told us all categorically that no rules were broken, but this is your home. You saw what was going on, you participated in what was going on, you made the rules as Prime Minister, so it does beg the question, are you a liar?
Right, Paul, I think you've no, but look at what I said to Parliament, and look at what Sue has said about what took place, and about my role in it. I just to get back to what I said, I think in the first answer. Okay, I was in the cabinet room for a short period, standing up at my desk on June the 19th, 2020, and some people came in to congratulate me on my birthday. Now, there weren't very many of them. It didn't occur to me then that this was a breach of the rules. I'm going to be absolutely frank with you. It didn't occur to me. It really didn't. And I think, that's just the way it was. Similarly, when I was speaking to colleagues about the departure of another SPAD or a government advisor or an official, it didn't occur to me that this was anything except what it was my duty to do as Prime Minister during a pandemic. And that's why I did it. And that's why I spoke as I did in the House of Commons. And yes, as Sue has found, and as everybody can see, and as the evidence has shown, after I had been there, things did not go well.
And you haven't heard anything like music or partying?
No. There's a let's be absolutely clear. This is a very, very big place. There are if you take number 10 and the cabinet office together, there are hundreds of rooms. My impression was that I was personally at work events. But look, that doesn't absolve me of responsibility for what happened in this place. I take that responsibility. I continue to make sure that we make changes. I've apologised today, not just again to the House and to the country, but also to the custodians and the staff who now it turns out were wrongly and badly treated. I think it's repugnant that happened, but I think the best thing I can do now, without in any way wishing to minimise what has happened, is simply get on with delivering on the priorities of the people, and that is what we are going to do. And I'm sorry to say I have to leave you all now.
Come on, Prime Minister. Live questions.
Okay, I'll take 3 more questions, but I was under strict instructions to agree to no more than 9. But such is my natural generosity of soul. I will go to Pippa Crerar.
From the Mirror. Prime Minister, you say that Sue Gray, that no individual gathering was swept under the carpet by Sue Gray, but there was one very striking omission, which was the gathering in your flat on November the 13th, 2020, which she started investigating, and then says in her report that she paused when the police started looking at it, and then concluded, after the police closed their investigation, that she wasn't going to carry on that investigation. So in the absence of any other explanation, what were you, your wife, and 5 aides doing for several hours with alcohol and snacks in your flat that evening?
Yeah.
Specifically, did you or any of your senior political team see her report before this morning and either have any role in editing it or requesting the removal of any facts about gatherings and dining
No,
rooms?
so the first I saw the report and read it in its entirety was at and to the best of my knowledge, the first time any of my team saw it was at when we got it at 10 o'clock, I think shortly after 10 o'clock this morning. And when I said earlier on, somebody said there were things in it that were news to me. What I meant by that, there was evidence and details that I simply hadn't heard before, and maybe they'd have been published before, but I simply hadn't heard them. So on the Downing Street flat, what Sue says in her previous interim report is the flat has a dual use. Historically, Prime Ministers have used it for meetings. The event in question was a work meeting, and that was what the Metropolitan Police did investigate it, and that was certainly the outcome of their investigation. Andrew.
Andrew Marr from LBC, it's absolutely blatantly obvious from Sue Gray's report that the staff involved knew they were breaking the rules. They talked about going out by back entrances, avoiding the cameras, and so on. You told us, you told the House of Commons, you told the British people again and again that no rules were broken. When those stories started to come out about the parties, did it never occur to you to ask around and find out what had happened?
Yes, of course, and that's when I instituted the inquiry. Who's next?
Did you start like you?
Well, look, I mean, you know, I'm not. Ben.
Prime Minister, I know you don't want to get into specific people, but the report does clearly lay out a lot of evidence about Martin Reynolds, who ran your private office. He invited everyone to the Bring Your Own Booze party. He said he thought they got away with it. He is still in your government. He's in the Foreign Office, and reportedly he's being sent on an ambassadorial post. Can you explain to the public why you're keeping him in post?
Look, I'm not. I really am not going to get into the business of identifying any particular official over any other, or any or political appointee or anybody in this whole affair. I think it's right. So in the pictures that Sue Gray has put out, I think it's entirely right that I should be the one who is not pixelated. I'm the person at the top. I'm making the changes. I instituted an inquiry. I don't think anybody. Just to repeat my point, I don't think anybody could fairly say that what Sue Gray has done is to cover things up or put things under the carpet. It is a very thorough and extensive piece of work. It covers all sorts of events. What we need to do now is learn from what happened and you know. I'm not saying I minimise what has happened, but we have a huge amount of business the government is getting on with right now, mainly to do with the cost of living, mainly to do with the economy, and we really need to focus on that. And with that, I'm afraid, having given three more answers than was promised, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you.
There we go. That was the Prime Minister speaking inside Downing Street, addressing questions from journalists in relation to Sue Gray's report. Many journalists still got questions about what went on, whether some of those parties were investigated. But the Prime Minister repeatedly, time and time again, insisting that he felt the rules were not broken, insisting that he felt that the events that he had turned up to were work events, but also that he was apologising and taking responsibility for what had happened. He is now going to travel from Downing Street back here to Parliament, where he's going to speak to Conservative MPs in the next hour or so. But there is a definite attempt, perhaps unsurprisingly, by Downing Street to draw a line under this. We'll have continuing coverage of all of that and the rest of the day's news here on GB News. Colin Brazier is on.
Good afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he's humbled by Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown parties, adding that it has identified a number of failings, some of which are entirely his own. The 37-page document, which contains photos, highlights a number of events where many people gathered and alcohol was consumed excessively. It concludes the gatherings were not in line with COVID guidance at the time and that the senior leadership must bear responsibility for this culture. Boris Johnson says he will keep moving forward and deliver on the priorities of the people.
When some of these officials and advisers were leaving their jobs, I briefly attended gatherings to thank them for everything they had done, because I believe that recognising achievement and preserving morale are essential duties of leadership. The police did not find my attendance at these occasions to be a breach of the rules, but they found otherwise in respect of some of those gatherings after I had left or when I was not in the building.
Well, a snap poll by YouGov has found 59% of Brits surveyed think the Prime Minister should resign. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer told the Commons